SMB Investor with Nick Bryant and Sean Smith.
Hey everyone, you got Sean Smith here, managing partner at Search Fund Ventures and founder of SMB Investor Network. Today I'm joined by Beki Darlin, who has an extensive career in sales and marketing and has also done quite a bit to help support the search community, especially the female community in search. So she's going to tell us all about her background, how she got where she is today, and some tips that she's learned along the way for searchers.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Sean. So, my background was inadvertently shifted to sales and marketing when I got let go from a six-figure paralegal position. So, I was actually on track to become an attorney. I was pregnant. We bought a new house. I'd just gotten a new car, and I was let go without warning because the firm was downsizing. And so that kind of built the fire in me to have more autonomy over what I was doing with my life. I was like, this is not cool that I can be building my whole life and then somebody else can just take it away from me for something that wasn't even my fault. Like the company was downsizing. It wasn't I had done anything wrong. And so I started in sales and marketing about 18 years or so ago. I taught myself through copywriting, wound up building my own agency, and then having a very small exit of that agency, shifting to fractional chief marketing officer work and chief revenue officer work. And a lot of what I did was focused on hyper growth for companies. So in the PE world, it's more value acceleration. So it's adding a very specific type of value that is not just sales and marketing, but sales and marketing are the fuel that kind of help align all the other systems within the company to add real value so that if they want to sell, they can, kind of the build to sell principle. If they want to sell, they can, but they don't have to. It gives them that optionality. While I was doing this for companies, though, I was not getting any of that added value that I was bringing to companies. And so I shifted a little bit more. I was introduced to the idea of consulting for equity or being a growth partner where I get a minority stake of the growth that I help create for companies, which is awesome. And that led me into ETA and kind of the bigger picture, where I originally was pretty set on the idea that traditional search was not for me. I didn't necessarily want to be an owner operator, but I really wanted to focus on helping add that value creation process for companies and helping them navigate that post acquisition, like first 3 years where everything is crazy and you're trying to get back to black as soon as possible. That's where I love to operate. Through that, I saw a tweet a couple years back that said, "Why aren't there more women in this space?" And it was a little bit of cognitive dissonance for me because I knew a lot of women in this space, but they all were operating independently. It was very fragmented. And so that's where Our Waee came from. It's our women's acquisition entrepreneur ecosystem. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit more, but originally it was just an aggregator for instead of having all of these wildly fragmented things, think of it like a roll up for women in search. Like, we're just going to put all of the things that you need to be able to successfully find a business, acquire it, and then scale and operate it afterwards. We're going to put that all in one place with people who like to work with women. And so that's kind of the basis for that. Through that, I was a growth partner for a searcher who was looking at architecture and interior design firms. That was their background. We found, and I decided to join their search as the growth partner because they weren't strong in sales and marketing. I was like, that I can handle that piece. Then the SBA decided to start changing things. And so through that process, they eventually had to not participate in the deal anymore because they weren't a US citizen. And that meant that I had to make a decision of if I was going to step into that full-time owner operator role, if that was something that was worth it to me. And it is. So we're in due diligence on that. And so I feel like that is quite a bit to start talking about.
It's a great story and definitely a tough sort of slap in the face how it all kind of got started in the paralegal role. I read a story about a gentleman who runs a pretty successful company in the search space, but banks were more keen to lend to him when he was working a full-time job rather than when he owned his own business because they perceived him being an entrepreneur as a higher risk. So it was actually harder
Mhm.
for him to get the mortgage he was looking for on his home. But when you hear stories like yours, it's totally true that when you control your own destiny, when you have that level of autonomy, I think for many folks, it's almost de-risking rather than being truly at the whim of a W-2 role. So that's inspiring to hear. It's great to see where you've come since then. Bringing together searchers is a common theme, whether it's bringing together women in search or bringing together various groups. Search is very lonely. A lot of people talk about that, right? When you're looking for a business to acquire, it's hard to know if you're doing things right, if you're making progress
Yeah.
until you close that deal. And then after you close the deal, we had a gentleman named Rand Larson on here a while back. He runs a community of business owners. It can get even more lonely, right? When you're managing
Mhm.
lots of new folks that you need to establish authority with. And to your point, just scramble to get back into the black. So it's great commentary. What you're doing is really cool. Would love to just hear more about how the community has grown, some wins or stories you guys have had. And one thing I really liked that you and I spoke about a couple weeks ago is just where you've seen the women in your community excel really well, right? And maybe it
Yeah.
was surprising or maybe it was expected. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so I agree with you fully that community is really, really important. I think that's one of the things that we tend to underestimate the importance of during search. People are more concerned with where are we going to get this equity gap covered from, or how do we structure the deal, or what really needs to go on my LOI, or all of those things. But they're also doing it kind of in a vacuum. And especially as first timers, if you're doing it in a vacuum, it is very easy to start second guessing and questioning yourself and not knowing, because there are so many variables that can go into each particular, like there's not one size fits all for a deal structure. Yes, there are some structures that tend to be used, but even within them, if it's a manufacturing company, it's going to be a different structure than something that's like e-commerce or med tech or something. Like the type of business that it is necessitates that some of those terms are different, and the health of it, there's just a lot of variables at a lot of different points on the process. So it can get kind of crazy, especially because one of the ways that women mitigate risk is by research. We go into FBI mode. We want to know everything about everything so that we can have contingency plans A through Z, because a lot of times we're used to, like, these women are coming from high level C-suite kind of level, senior executive level in the corporate world, where they have had to justify their reasons for making a move or for doing it this way instead of that way. We have to bring the receipts, basically, of here is what I want to do. Here is why this is smarter. Yes, I've already thought about like the 37 different ways that you're going to suggest that we do it. I've already gone through those, and here's why this is still the right option. Right? So we're kind of used to that, and we bring it to search, which I think is one of the superpowers that we have. Is we are biologically wired to mitigate risk. Like we want to have some sort of certainty there, so we're able to see things a little bit ahead of, or other things that people wouldn't necessarily look at as, it can this become a problem down the road, or is this just something that we need to kind of keep an eye on? But what that leads to for women specifically is they just get stuck in search. They just get stuck in getting ready and preparing and going through like a bunch of different industries. They try to take some kind of an industry agnostic approach when they're newer, because they don't know what they don't know. And I think that's true for everybody, but especially true for women. They just want to kind of get the reps in. But when you're looking at different industries, you're going to have to understand what the multiple is for that industry and what the actual deal breakers for that particular industry. It's going to be different for a waste management company than it is for a medical device supplier. Like they're just going to be different. Even in my deal, the multiples for an architecture firm are different than that for an interior design firm. And the models within those two firms are different. There's licensure in one, there's not in the other. So if they're not clear on what they bring to the table, how they would be an asset to the business, then it's really hard to find the right kind of business to even look for. So one of the things that our community helps with is dialing in on what is your experience particularly suited to do. Because there are some companies that, as long as you understand business, you can step in and have a reasonable assumption that you're going to do okay. But there's also a lot of searchers now competing for those businesses because it's a low barrier to entry. What I found with a lot of women is they tend to have specific subject matter expertise. A lot of them have tech backgrounds, a lot of them have medical backgrounds, a lot of them have finance backgrounds or education. And those are things that make them a good buyer for companies that not everybody would qualify for. But they also have to know, okay, well, how do I find those companies and how do I start those conversations? And should I do on market, off market? And how do I? So having a community, and women are verbal processors, generally speaking, we want to talk it. Like, we don't necessarily even need somebody to talk back to us, but we need to be in a space where we can talk it through ourselves, because we probably already know the answer, but we need to talk it through. And so having a space where other women who uniquely understand that process and know you're going to be talking about this, you don't necessarily want me to fix it for you or to suggest something for you to do. You just need me to hold space for you to work through it. And that's different than going into a community, while valuable, where you're one of two women in a room full of men. Men just think differently and they communicate differently and they approach structuring the deal differently. And we need all of that. But we're still, even when we find community in those kinds of places, we still have to translate it to how we do business, which kind of adds another layer of complexity on something that is already a pretty steep learning.
Those are great, I would say, patterns that it seems like you've identified, and that it sounds like you've kind of crafted both a community and almost like a accelerator in a way,
Yeah.
around a unique form of accelerator. How I guess, are there any kind of stories or kind of examples you can share of how folks who have kind of taken things end to end?
Yeah, we've had a couple of ladies that had been searching on their own for anywhere from like 8 to 12 months before they found Our Waee and started joining the calls. And then once they joined the calls, they were closed within 6 months. Like, they were able to identify a new target and close. And that's not even with like the full support. That's just with a once a week call to keep them on track. There are others who have started very gung ho traditional search. Like, we are traditional searchers. We're going to figure this out. And then we kind of just had a question, not trying to discourage them from doing that, but like, what is your actual outcome that you want? And what is your fear around being able to or not being able to achieve that outcome? We've had several ladies that have come in as traditional searchers that have shifted to self-funded search and been able to close within 6 to 9 months. And it's on a wide variety of different company types. We've had some traditional searchers that just come in because they're like, there's not a lot of women that I can talk to. I just want to talk through, they're doing this with this particular offer. I've requested the SIM and this is what they're doing. And how do I handle that? And we just help them. And then 3 months later, they're closed. So I think it's really powerful that when you have somebody, and this is in general, not just for women, but when you have somewhere where you can just go ask the questions that need to be asked and get something that is useful, even if it's not the answer, if it's just how to think about it differently, then it makes a huge difference in the confidence to take the action. We had one lady, she's actually a Canadian searcher. She was looking at landscaping and garden centers. And there was one deal where the broker was being very, very gatekeepy. And it wasn't because she wasn't qualified. Like she's a very qualified buyer. Sometimes they just don't want to deal with particular funding types, or they just don't, there's just quirks that come with the brokers. And so she brought that in a couple of different weeks to our community, and we were able to help her understand how to align the interests of the broker with her interest in order to make progress on the deal. And so she's moving forward. We had another searcher who thought that this was a great company. It was going really well. Digging into it, the financials were not great. And then eventually the seller kept trying to retrade in bad faith at the end. And so we were able to work with that searcher and help her be like, there's a better deal. Like, I know we're invested. I know we've put time, like they were ready to sign the agreement and the seller kept coming back and trying to retrade. I was like, this isn't, you got to be able to kill your darlings. Like, you got to be able to kill ones that aren't going to be good if you close. So it's not always about closing and successfully running it. Sometimes it's getting that feedback to know when to walk away. Even if you've invested, even if you've done all the due diligence and you have to kind of eat those significant broken deal costs, it's better to eat those than to be on the hook with a personal guarantee for a business that is not going to work.
That's for sure. Yeah, it sounds like thematically the support networks build a lot of confidence for folks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just we hear that a lot broadly in search, as I touched on earlier. The search process in general is lonely. And if you don't have those networks of like-minded folks that you can trust and confide in, it can make big decisions like closing a deal or walking away from a deal so much harder.
It's that gut check, like, am I crazy or is this just a normal thing that I have to learn how to navigate, which I think is universal.
Exactly. And for investors in our network, we've found a lot of folks really appreciate just either having us as a sounding board or other investors that are looking at deals. And that can be a great way to just sense check, that everyone's thinking about things the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Same concept, right? You've looked at a deal, you're concerned about customer concentration, but you like everything else about it. And people check in with us on things like that or similar, and it's always healthy discussion and good to get more perspectives in the room.
Yeah. And Casey Minshew of M&A Launchpad brought up a good point when he was talking about walking into a deal as an independent sponsor. He said sometimes men have to do a certain amount of posturing. Like, that's part of just the deal process. You walk into a room with the seller who doesn't think that you can close the deal. You have to be able to kind of posture and make sure that you guys can come to the table and have a conversation. Women do the same thing, but differently. Like, our way of bringing everybody back to the table and kind of saying, hey, you need to take me seriously, and being willing to kind of walk away if it's not for you. The way that we go about doing those things is fundamentally different than how men do it. So a lot of the advice that's out there just for general consumption is based on how men do business. You go in, make sure that you make that your body language a certain way. If a woman tries to do that in the same room, she's going to get a dramatically different result, rather than if she goes in with kind of the power that women have to say, I get that you aren't taking me seriously, but you should be. And a lot of times that is a different way of how we walk into the room and how we talk about the deal. It has to be different than how a man would do it. And it varies if you're talking to a man versus if you're talking to a female seller. Like, those are gonna, there's a lot of emotional intelligence and nonverbal communication that comes into play to kind of mitigate what isn't being said and instill confidence and rapport with the other side.
Those are great. Two really great call outs. I'd love to go deeper into both. So first, because so much of the content and so many resources are written by men or geared towards men, what are some great resources you found, besides Our Waee, of course, that really reflect and can support how women in the search world do business?
There aren't a whole lot. Women's Search Network is one of those resources, though a lot of their information does tend to skew more towards traditional searchers, but I found that there are some resources that aren't recommended a whole lot that are really useful. There's one book that's specifically for women. It's called Unbound by Kaja Urbanite. I'll have to get the spelling on that. But her book is all about the body language and female presence. It's not specifically related to search funds. It's women in leadership. And so we're having to find a lot of those resources that are indirectly applicable to what we're doing, which is part of the reason that I think Our Waee is important, is we can take what's translated, like Walker Diebel has that great book, Buy Them Build, right? It's fantastic. It's not how women do business. So while we can take the majority of that, there still are pieces that we're going to have to tweak a little bit, because if we tried to do it exactly that way, it wouldn't get the same result. So we do use a lot of the standard materials, and then everybody winds up customizing them kind of their own way and finding something that already exists for women, by women, the way that women think. There isn't a lot of that.
And it sounds like you guys are well positioned to add to the academic body of knowledge, if you will.
Yeah. Well, for example, like one of women's highest drivers is autonomy. So regardless of the industry, like they want to retain as much control as possible because that's a safety thing for them. That's something that mitigates risk for them versus a lot of traditional funds. And I'm not hating on traditional funds. It just, you have less overall control, and that sometimes can feel very risky, especially if you don't know that you need to secure an agreement, so they can't just fire you just because before you vested.
That's another interesting point. These differences, as you've noted, can also be superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one that you touched on was just the ability, almost the need to define a thesis where you as the buyer can add a lot of value. That's, I think, universally investors love to see that, right? When you have a very specific thesis that's generally more niche, but you're a great fit for, that's a dream come true in many cases for investors, right? That's one. You talked a little bit about, emotional intelligence, which I think is very acute in many cases, and just more and more being talked about is largely more important than IQ.
Yeah.
Would love to hear some of the other kind of superpowers you've identified, and just any examples you've seen of how, women have leveraged those to have really great outcomes or initial indications of outcomes.
Yeah, so I think it's particularly useful in the SMB market, where there are some sellers that are very much more, this is their baby. They're more concerned with legacy. It's not just a purely financial play. I think that's really the niche where women are just, they just own it, because a lot of times, like, we naturally look for the win-win. And that's not to say that men don't, but men tend to look for, how can I get what I want, and then also give them enough of what they want that they're not going to fight me on what I want.
Yeah. A
Whereas,
little more Machiavellian in some cases, right?
yeah, yeah, it's a I lead, you follow kind of approach. Whereas women are, we're going to do this. We're going to do this together. They tend to be more community and collaborative in the process. Where that really stands out is they're not vetting companies just on financials or just on industry. They're looking holistically at the human capital within it. And is this a company that I feel I can have some sort of impact? And it doesn't need to be like, this is a something for special education children and we're doing this awesome. It can be a landscape company, but does this particular landscape company hit my purpose? Does it align with my purpose in life and how I can show up for it? Because the way that women operate and the way that our energy works, just in terms of like cognitive load and energetic load of being able to execute without burning out, we tend to need to have more recovery and recharge period than our male counterparts. So it needs to be something where you can be grinding and be deep in post-acquisition integration, but not run the risk of burning out. So they're looking for those kinds of things. The other ways that they tend to work is getting more creative deal structures, because a lot of the businesses at this level don't necessarily qualify for a straightforward deal structure. They're not quite the sellable asset that the seller hoped that they were. And so the seller is faced with the option of, well, I can just liquidate or walk away from this and my people aren't taken care of and my legacy goes up in smoke. Or they can help me understand how I can turn this into something rather than just nothing. And I think particularly with creative deal structures, just a pattern that I've noticed is when men do creative deal structures, they try to do it for their benefit. Again, when women do creative deal structures, they're trying to find a win-win for everybody. Sellers are typically a little bit more receptive to that. Sellers are sellers. So some of them are great. Some of them are not so great. Some of them try to take advantage because you're a girl. We've had some where, it's a husband and wife team. The wife is actually the majority owner on it, and the seller only wants to talk to the husband because they feel like that's the person they should be talking to. So there's still, it's not all sunshine and sprinkles, but I think there's a lot of ways that women come to the table and help convey that safe pair of hands. I can preserve and expand on your legacy a little bit. It's a little bit more natural for them, I think.
Well, I think those are excellent examples of body of knowledge on negotiating styles, if you will, kind of collaborative styles, looking for win-wins versus competitive forms of negotiation where it's all about how do I maximize my benefit. It's
Yeah.
interesting to hear you say generally the women in search community focuses more on collaborative styles, which might, my senses tend to be more effective. There's lots of great books on negotiation, but I think one item that stuck with me was risks related to different negotiation styles coming into contact with each other. So when you have someone, I guess the biggest call out that I've heard, and I'm curious if you've ever seen examples of this. It sounds like maybe you have with kind of the husband and wife example you shared, but when you have a very competitive negotiator who's looking to maximize their value, and you have a very accommodating negotiator, which is further afield than kind of looking for a win-win, that's almost becoming to a point where very accepting to try and support the other side and their goals, you can really run into some challenges, particularly for the accommodator, right? Who's going to, in some cases, get run over by a competitive negotiator. I don't know if you've seen those sorts of
Yeah,
things play out or if you have ways to kind of coach people to watch out for that, but
we do. So women also often have the societal or the conditioning that they have to be nice. Like if they are firm in something, not even if they're aggressive in something, if they're firm in something, that's seen as aggressive. And so sometimes we have to navigate that, but also you don't want to give up leverage. So you can be accommodating to a point. I think there are some things that Chris Voss covers in Never Split the Difference of here's what you want. Here's what I want. Here's the gap. How do you propose that we close this gap? Because sometimes it's allowing them to feel like allowing the other party to feel like they're winning. Sometimes you have to position it to give them a win where you're not really losing, but they feel like they're winning. And that can sometimes shift the whole thing of like, do I need to? And it's not always an ego thing, but I see a lot, it's kind of an ego thing of like, I'm not going to let you take advantage of me. Women, I think, are a little bit better of not letting that play a factor in their negotiations. They tend to say, okay, well, what is driving the other party to act? Why are they being so aggressive on this particular point? Like what? And then clarifying around that and dividing a win that it's not really something that is a deal breaker on their side. So it's okay to let the other side have it. But they understand that they need to make it look like a fight. So I think they're a little bit better at that, honestly, of letting the other side feel like they're getting the upper hand when they're not really doing anything that's out of what we would deem acceptable.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Well, it sounds like you've developed a bespoke masterclass in negotiation for your community, which is very beneficial, not only in search, I'm sure, elsewhere. We're coming up on time here. Any kind of last stories or closing remarks you'd like to make?
I think that it's really important to understand that whether it's a woman who is solo searching or whether you're looking to partner with a woman, that there are benefits to both approaches, to both sides and both communication styles. There are some deals where having a woman as a 51% or more owner creates additional leverage that might not have otherwise been in the deal. We've got one of our members who's doing subcontractor roll ups. And her being a woman with industry experience in a construction field allows her to have some leverage that wouldn't otherwise be there. But she has two male partners. It works really well to have both sides. And I think that's what I would like to see more of. And I'm so thankful to you and to others who give an opportunity to share. I think people don't understand how much of a benefit having women as part of the team or interacting with women and getting more women into search and acquisition in general benefits everybody. Because I think having that more relationship based, long term kind of vision goes really well with some of the transactional, shorter term win styles that are out there. So I would say just keep an eye open. There's a lot of us out here. We're just operating very fragmented because we think we're one of one.
You and Our Waee will bring hopefully more women to the forefront and give us some great opportunities.
I'm definitely all about enabling women. Women are so resilient. Like the two things that you mainly look for in a good operator, at least from my perspective, is resilience and grit. Like, can you figure it out? If you don't know what's going on, can you figure it out? You want to know who's masters of that? Women.
That's for
They
sure.
figure it out. They make it work. They will have a paperclip and a piece of gum and some duct tape and MacGyver that situation into something that is amazing. So I think that it's a really great opportunity. I'm really excited to see where things go with our community and other communities that are popping up, and just generally for the acquisition space at this level. It's really, really exciting.
Excellent. Beki, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insights.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.